Hi everybody, my name is Jim Hemphill. I write about movies for IndieWire, and I am thrilled to introduce Mark Pellington. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, Lesley, Ann, what your reaction was watching this new re-edit of the movie. What was going through your mind watching it?
I was really blown away, honestly. I was so, it's so different, so utterly different from the the film that was put out originally. I mean, it's so much lighter and focused really on the sexuality. There's plenty of sexuality in here, but it's really this sort of tragic in a way, coming of age story, but beautiful and about friendship. And I just thought it was, he's heard this already. I thought it was really wonderful.
Yeah. Just keep going. Bears repeating.
What was the impetus for this, for revisiting the movie and doing such a drastic re-edit?
Boredom during COVID. I was rooting around in my office and I found an old Betacam tape that said Editor's Assembly, 3.5 hour Editor's Assembly. So everything that the Leo Trombetta, who I wish was here, everything he had assembled, so we come back from Indianapolis, it's like, here's everything, here's the car coming down, here's them getting out of the car, knocking on the door, every entry and exit, 135-page script, 6-day weeks, and it was my first movie, and I was like, oh my God, it's the book coming to life. Oh my God, look at that street in Indiana, look at it's the 50s. Oh my God, look at Nina's room. Oh my God, like every shot. It was every shot I shot, really. And I watched it, I gave it to Leo and I watched it, and we were bored, and I said, what do you think? And he just recut it. And we got it down to a shape, and I said, put some voiceover in it, because Leo had cut Little Children, Todd Field's movie. I said, I always loved that voiceover in it. And I felt like the book that I loved growing up, this book, I never really captured that feeling of the book. Like no version of this movie was ever, certainly before, close to the book I loved. So I said, well, let me just see. We'll just do it for fun. Steven Soderbergh recuts, people recut movies all the time. But anyway, we did it and cut to a little bit later. We were doing some TV. Lakeshore, who had made the movie, had gone bankrupt. So we were working on some TV stuff at Village Roadshow with Mothman Prophecies and Arlington Road. I said, you guys have an unseen Ben Affleck movie that never got to cable or streaming or TV. And of course, a couple dollar signs go up from their end, but they had somebody there that said, there's this really cool company in New York called Oscilloscope. I said, of course, I know Oscilloscope. A friend of mine had done Short Bus. So they were re-releasing these 90s movies, kind of finding a market for like these repackaged 90s films, indie films. So we sent the cut to Dan Berger, and he dug it, and obviously it was a long between getting the business right between them. I was just tenacious. I was like, come on guys, let's just make it work. And to Dan's credit, and even to, he made it happen. So we put it together and went through all the process of just finding the film in boxes of just like scraps of, like you see it in the film, like I'm like, boy, that's pretty sketchy looking stuff because it was a dupe of a work print. But the point was to be able to restore. The movie that went to Sundance was 100 and maybe 14 minutes. All that stuff with the beard was never seen before. All the whole sequence with the beard, the whole quarry, after the quarry, Sonny confessing after the fire, the whole third act. There was no third act in the movie that we released. It was all Sonny masturbating, get caught masturbating, throwing the magazine. It was like a horny sex comedy, and it was more Porky's, and now it's a little more American Graffiti. It's more of a story of friendship. It's really about two boys becoming men who need to leave their mothers at the core identity of that. So that kind of that mastery of sexuality and demasculinization of these guys really comes from their inability to kind of deal with women or come to terms with how they need to do that, but really leave home and leave that womb. And that's like kind of the core story that I was identified with. So thanks to Leo, brought in Pete Adams, who did a new score, Sergio Pinero did the new titles. It was a great chance to kind of like 25 years later, redo it. No filmmaker ever gets that chance. And it's gonna be on DVD, deleted scenes, documentaries. Like, wow. It's not just like somebody gets to screen the old movie once, like you get way more than you ever. And I'm just super proud that we pulled it off.
Now, going back 25 years, this is your first movie. You're dealing with a cast where you've got some people who are like very experienced. You've got other people who are right at the beginning of their careers who would become huge stars. What was the learning curve like for you working with actors at this level?
Well, in looking at it, I realized like the reason shot with one camera. Maybe the dance scene we had two cameras. Like one camera, there weren't many takes. I almost want to say like when we're doing the mom scene. And Lesley gets up and goes and faces Jill Clayburgh. I'm like, I didn't have time to go do a reverse.
I say that.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Please, I'm sorry. We didn't have like time to come back and be on that other side. Because first movie, you run out of it. And if I had shot a 112-page script, maybe you would have done that. But, so it was just, you never have more passion or more fire than when you do your first movie and more stamina. And you learn, and looking at this now, I trusted the material, I trusted the actors, and just let them do their thing. I think I've always done that, but I've just cast it well and let them be. And they all want to be directed and guide them if they want to be, but each one's different. Cameron Crowe gave me good advice before the movie. I was friends with him. He said, don't be best friends with your actors. Don't be best friends with them. Be a benevolent dictator father. Because someone needs a hug, like Rose needed a hug and was very insecure. Ben, you had to keep out of the tanning salon. It was like, Ben, stop tanning. Jeremy just was like, okay, you can only pat your head 4 times in the scene. Very mannered, So each one had to do their own thing. And so when you come to like, say, Lesley and Jill, like, it's like, okay, it's like, I remember working with Alan Bates. It's like, let me just watch great artists, masters, let me just see them do their thing. Because they were so invested in it. They're flying to Indiana to be in this movie. Nobody's getting rich on it, but they love the character. And they like the piece, and so they all wanted to be part of the team. And it was just a fun time.
I'll tell you a funny story about Jill and I. I was in the middle of doing a Broadway show. I was in the middle of rehearsing for a Broadway show, which was terrifying to leave the rehearsal and come and do the movie, but I had a prior commitment and I was dying to do it. But anyway, I don't know if you remember this, but we had a little bit of rehearsal, like days of rehearsal. And Jill and I, we went up to some conference room in the hotel with Mark, and Mark sat there and said, okay, so do you guys want to rehearse this? Do you want to, and we both, well, Jill was the first one, she went, no, I don't want to rehearse. Do you remember that?
No, I do.
And I said, I don't want to be there.
And you learn that. You learn that some people need to rehearse and some people don't. Some people really want to talk it through. And you learn that on your first movie, you learn it in TV, and you have to navigate that because you want to give each person what they want. So every time I work with an actor now, I'm like, how do you like to be worked? What's your best process? And some are like, you can describe a painting and be abstract to them, and then the other person's like, give me an action to do. And you're like, oh wait, I can't be like weirdo here, I gotta be, you really have to you have to be a chameleon, really. But if everybody shares the text, right? If everybody shares the text, everybody kind of knows their character, and also they have more confidence, you get to like, now I can say like, I don't know, see what happens. See what happens, I don't know, what's your instinct, what do you think? And then I'm usually good at like, keep it in the lane or go further out or opening it up. And some actors you can say, talk to them in the middle of the scene, and others are like, don't do that. Like Richard Gere was like, don't talk to me in the middle of the scene, and Will Patton loved to. So like, whoa, so what do you do? But you have to figure that out. So you're a conductor.
What do you do when you have Richard Gere and Will Patton in the same scene?
I have a question. Did you on purpose cast the 3 women, not Amy, but Rachel, Rose, myself? Because there's a similarity in look. This was the first, I leaned over to my manager and I said, there's a similarity in look with the 3 of us.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sort of a-
Well, it's funny, always in the book, Nina was, I think was a blonde in the book.
Probably.
But I think I wanted there to be, it wasn't intentional, I knew that Marty had to be, the Jewess, right? But it's good that that was the kind of thing that appealed to them. Sure.
Yeah, also, yeah, it's just.
I don't know, sometimes intentional, years later you look back like, this was fully intended and, I don't know. All I know is over the years I've seen old DVDs and VHSs of audition tapes, I'm like, oh my God, it's just so funny, the process of people putting themselves, I love actors, I love that they just put themselves out there and throw their heart and soul into it and take risks and, it's just such that alchemy, and I love putting a cast together. And so now, years later, I love seeing this. I can't wait, next week, Nick Offerman. This was Nick's first movie. He was just this guy from Chicago, and a bunch of these guys came in, and he was great. So seeing his career go on, and I can't wait for him to see it. He's like, oh my God, I was so terrible in that movie. I'm like, dude, you were great.
Yeah. Well, obviously, if you were, in the middle of doing a Broadway show, and you're willing to fly to Indianapolis, go to Indianapolis to do this movie for not that much money, you must have really wanted to do it. What was it about the part that drew you to this?
Well, she's so, she's so flamboyant and so domineering. There's another scene that's gone. But it was one of the things that really appealed to me was her sort of antisocial behavior and her lack of awareness of anything but her own sort of desirability, her thing, which came pretty easily to me at that time. Sorry to say. And I think, she was a really original kind of character for me, and I had not read the book. So, really what I got from it was from the page, and her, the largeness of her, and yet she had a kind of canny intelligence, I thought, she knew what was going on, and not her. It just was all really interesting to me to try to find and fill out and become.
Here, I'm going to tell you one anecdote, and I wish he was here. And Dan Wakefield, the writer of the book and the screenplay, is 90 years old. And we probably finished the cut of this and had something to see after Leo's first voiceover, probably 6 months ago, before we had done the score and stuff like that. And I was able to get Dan to see it because he was losing his sight. He has full-on glaucoma, and now he can't see. So he got to see the film before he lost his sight. So this is a guy that Joan Didion is the one who convinced Dan to write this novel. He had this idea, but he was friends with Joan and her husband, and she said, "You're staying in our house out here in California, and you have to write this." And he holed up for about a month and wrote the first draft of the novel. So he's always very thankful to her. And on the DVD that's coming out, all his stories and anecdotes are in there, but he got to see it. Now, I was clamoring even back then when we made it. I said, Dan, you gotta write a sequel. So he has an idea for a sequel. Now, whether he can do it or not, I don't know. But I'm convinced that what I want to do is I want to go down to Miami. I have to go to Miami, where he is going to move to, right? Because his goddaughter's taking care of him, and he's 90. And his message to me, like a couple weeks ago, just like, man, I just was so grateful, and like the most memorable message. But this guy gave me this gift when I was 13 years old of this book, cut to now 47 years later, right? That he's able to I'm able to come full circle. And I want to go there. I said, Dan, maybe I'll just come there and record you and tell me the story, the sequel that you have in your mind, right? And he has this idea that the Gunner's in his early 50s and something happens in his life and he's infirmed and he and Sonny have lost touch and Sonny has to come kind of take care of him, which would be Gunner's mom's still there, so we have to now.
Okay, fine.
No, Dan's 90. But I was like, so it's just like, just Dan, riff the story. Just tell me the story. Then we could take it from there. But if he could just tell me the story, I think that I could end up writing it and write a sequel to this.
That'd be so great.
Wouldn't that be awesome? That story, you have to see it. That's the greatest gift. The producer, Tom Rosenberg, it was his third movie that he financed. And he left me a message, and he's been going through tough stuff. This guy's a billionaire, won his Oscar, but he left me, so this movie left a lot of, it was very meaningful for a lot of people that worked on it. You know, it wasn't just a job, and not every movie is like that, but I think the special movies that we work on are those things. You'll never have your first movie, ever, again. You know, so to kind of come full circle on it. What was your first movie, Lesley?
Happiest Millionaire. It was a movie for Disney, Walt Disney.
Really?
Yeah, it was
And who else was in that?
Oh my God, Geraldine Page played my John Davidson's mother, and Greer Garson played my mother, and Fred McQuarrie played my dad.
How awesome
Can
is
you
that?
imagine
Oh,
my first
God.
movie? Yeah, it was
Oh my
dying.
God.
It was dying. Yeah.
It just really touched my heart. Like, I had a hard time stopping crying at the end. And to think that it was put out and sold as like a Porky's sex comedy, did that break your heart to see your initial thing
No,
changed?
but I can't say that. Look, I mean, we were complicit. We've just been took 2 years to get it made, then you do it, and Sundance was like, I was like, all right, you kind of get beat down by it, and I'm probably over it. Like, it wasn't like, hey, going all the way, but it was a little bit like, you had to counterpoint the title, right? The title, so you had to like brand it in a different way, you know, and even put that scene of Sonny in there where he's like, wow, you really understand what going all the way means. No, you know, because when it came out, it didn't get creamed, you know, it got decent, probably got higher Rotten Tomatoes in that movie than any movie I've done since then, so, yeah, I mean, it's like, Jesus, it's probably the most accessible movie I've ever made. I should go back to it. Maybe I can do it in reverse. What did I make before this? Anyway, no, it was like, you know, but it is what it is, you know, and that's time. That's, you know, that's like your first date when you did, like, God, if I could do that again, sure, but now we get a great chance, and thanks to Oscilloscope, we get it out in the world again. It's more mature. It's a more mature,
absolutely.
and like everything that's put back in really completes the themes of the book.
Yeah, there's some parallels to Catcher in the Rye, which I really loved, which obviously the original did not have, because that was a book that really touched me, and I'm sure that was a book you read as well, Mark, when you were kind of...
Yeah, this was called The Catcher in the Rye. This book, Dan's book was a big hit. It was a very successful novel. It was pitched as The Catcher in the Rye of the Midwest, just kind of less cynical, but really, you know, that kind of questioning the world, philosophical, existential male crisis, but I think this was, you know, a two-hander, and yeah, very, very thematically similar, but I think this cut shows more of the completion of their questioning. It goes throughout it, you know what I mean, and their friendship, because they're both questioning, and they both are incomplete without the other. I think the version that I showed at Sundance was probably 1 hour and 54. And it had 2 of the quarry scenes where they went like jumping in the water but didn't have the nighttime fire. And had part of the sandwich scene. So part of that friendship that was important to me. But the first thing when we were at 320 was we had to dump the entire beard subplot. It wasn't something you could have like a piece of. So that was the easy way to lift out a huge chunk that nobody ever knew. Which then left us to some repetition in the beginning There's a character that Jill Clayburgh brings in of a preacher that's there to save Sonny, and he catches Sonny jerking off, and then Sonny throws away his magazines, and the mother catches that. Those were scenes in there that were like, oh, funny, kind of, whereas like the scene of them in the hallway talking about her mortality was lost. Now, I don't think I was mature then where I liked that scene, and that scene in the hallway wasn't even in the book. Dan wrote that. I asked Dan to write that, and I had made a documentary about my father. So I wasn't really sure of my footing within that world. And I had read the book and I loved it, so I was enamored with it, and sometimes it was easy, like, that scene we don't need, but the core stuff, once you lose the beard to try to get within spitting distance, it's like a coin flip. Do we want to see a buddy coming over and having sex with him here, or the one in the car, which is more absurd? And so I think that Leo was a lot more upset about the cut than I was, and I think Tom Gorai and I, my producer, we just were like, it took 2 years from the time we went to make this, 2.5 from the time we went to make it to the time we got it done. So after it gets in Sundance and does pretty good, and you sell it, and you're at Sundance, it's like, fuck, we finally sold it. Like, can you just tighten it and do it? I think I was kind of just beat up by it. I was not like, oh, dude, no, you're ruining the movie. It was like, okay, it had gotten decent reviews there. Is it really that different? So it wasn't until now, 25 years later, that I found Leo's Editor's Assembly. Like, wow, Leo, let's put this on the drive, and he looked at it and tinkered with it. We're like, maybe we should do something with this, and look at it again. And so the stuff that felt immature, and even stuff that felt like, oh, expressionistic, but like when you put some of those scenes next to something with voiceover, suddenly they're like little portals or connections, and they don't feel just abrupt. So my biggest thing was like, I had only done commercials and videos and stuff, so each scene I felt good about, but when you put like a little satire scene with a wider lens next to something that's realistic, and it was a little uneven. So years would go by, and I'd see like American Beauty or other things that like, wow, I could really blend these tones together, and just a little bit more experience. As Andy was just saying, it's like, Andy goes, he couldn't have written that score 25 years ago. He was like, we didn't know what the fuck themes were, right? It was like, that piece is good for this scene, right? And this piece is good for this scene, and there's the sound, there's the needle drop for that. So it's like each individual piece, but suddenly also it's a first movie, and you got tons of oneers, and you have 8 scenes of oneers in a row, you can't pace that up. That's like, wait, what the fuck do we do with that 35 minutes? So all those things came to fruition, and years would go, and I'd be like, it was never as good as the book. It was never as good as my feeling of what that book meant to me. And part of that's performance and friendship and that whole thing. So it's a real gift to be able to try it again.
We've worked together for about 15 years, and I had never seen this. And it's interesting to see little sprinkles of you over those 15 years in this process. And I'm curious about, now that you revisit it, is there any modern technique that we've collaborated on that you would apply to that process if you did it again?
If I did it again, it's interesting because I was deep into, and I love Bobby Bukowski, the DP, but I had gone into like 5 months of kind of prep with Therese Dupre, the production designer, and a DP, Ellen Curtis. In New York, Ellen was going to shoot it. So we would have meetings, and all the scrap we had. And Ellen's style was very fluid. It was probably like more handheld and stuff like that. And probably more akin to what I'd been doing in poetry stuff and music videos before that. So when Ellen dropped out, and it really pissed me off. I mean, our friendship got ruptured for a few years. And I was really angry because she dropped out like less than 2 weeks before shooting. And Jeremy suggested Bobby, and people knew Bobby. Was like, great, but and Bobby's a totally different kind of cinematographer. And I look at some stuff now, and I'm like, God, when he comes out after the suicide thing, and like there's just 2 pieces of light, like I love that. And like that's the kind of scene that like I might have the balls to do that now, but at that time I was a lot less hands-on in terms of the style. than I would be now. So it's like, yeah, here's the scene that's just straight. And I love some of that, where like they're talking in the car, and it's two overs. We never go front on it, and the tone is really somber, and there's a lot of space, and you don't pull focus to the other side. You stay on focus in the foreground, so it's about their dislocation. And I knew the feeling I wanted on that, so that's just really simple. This thing is really simple because I trusted the performers, and I only had one camera, and it wasn't like, oh, let's go over here, let's go over here. I look at this and be like, oh, should I have come over and gotten, sure. What would it be like if I had seen Rose McGowan's face looking at Sonny when he's on the couch? I never had time to get it. As Lesley Ann joked in the first Q&A, when she gets up to go to the door to talk to, you see her ass, like there's no reverse. There's no reverse on Lesley Ann when she's arguing with Jill Clayburgh at the door. We didn't have time, right? Because I didn't have Ed Licht with me. I shot too much, 135-page script in 30 days, 16-hour days. It's like, fucking shoot less things and get more coverage, but it didn't matter. When you look at it now, Bobby taught me a really good lesson. First day of shooting, and it's literally the first day on the sidewalk, and Rachel Weisz takes her glasses off, right? And I'm like, oh, it's a close-up. Oh, let's go to here, right? And Bobby's like, no, you don't have to go here. Just like you're in a movie theater. Like it's gonna be big enough. I'm like, no, let's just trust me. And sure enough, on a big screen, I remember the dailies in this little movie theater in Indianapolis. We'd look at dailies, and my heart opened up. Like the first day of dailies, the first day of shooting of your first film, and you see it, and it's fucking big. And you see her eyes, and it was plenty. So I trusted him, and I was like, all right, just learn how to tell. But I didn't know screen direction. I literally didn't know which direction people should look. I was like, just tell them where to look. I have no clue. The basic grammar was, I'd never had done that before. Just a simple thing.
Do you think, though, as you learn the basic grammar and get more skilled, is there something that gets lost? Because you were talking earlier about how in your first movie there's this sort of, exuberance, enthusiasm, stuff that is never quite the same again.
The enthusiasm was for the characters. I just was so enamored. I'd be like, wow, this is like the book. Or, sure, let's let the car drive up the street and they get out. Like just every entrance and every exit. And you're just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And then you're like, you cut it out. But then when you went back to it, and I've learned over watching certain movies, like movies I've seen in the last year that friends have turned me on to, like European films that are like, the fucking camera's static and it sits there and it trusts the performance. I'm like, oh, there was something to be said for just like Jeremy Davies at the fire around, like, come over here and I'm gonna move around. Bobby was like, why are we moving the camera? We never fights. It's like, you're right, just earn the camera motion. And there's enough variety, and I think the look of the movie comes from the production design and the costume design, which is fucking incredible, right? And the simplicity of it.
We've got Arianne Phillips here, who's like one of the great costume designers there is.
And I've made it, I feel like Henry Poole and a couple movies after that where I don't think the script was as good as this, and I had to go prop it up with like stylistic things and montages, and it's like, sure enough, you get creamed by critics. It's like, I don't know, it's a little, and sure enough, they're using a crutch for, like, that was easy to fall into that, and if it ain't on the page, just sure enough, I look at this now and be like, it holds up. I think the performances are, for what it is, I think are very solid.
I know you mentioned the performers like a couple of different times, so I was curious if you noticed anything new or different in the performances when revisiting this movie.
I noticed how great the editor, like how, because I learned a lesson in a Henry Poole movie where Luke Wilson had a lot of the same tics and mannerisms, and Will Patton had in Mothman is that these things that, like, I really let Jeremy fucking do whatever he wanted, and thank God. But it's like, you know, like, I maybe would have, in watching it again, I maybe would have, like, reined him in a little bit, you know, like, great, just do it faster, cut to the point, because we're just like, it's going to make it really hard to pace something up or do something, yet that's his performance. So what's performance and what's, like, you know, I noticed something different in everything. I really love Amy Locane, and it's like every time I watch this movie, I'm like, wow, what a great underrated dramatic performer she is. And I was really glad because I kind of wanted Lily Taylor to do it. And there was a little bit of a fight when it came to this, and Amy wasn't what was written, but she really went for it. So I was very happy with that. And I think Ben's great. I see the seed of every Ben Affleck movie afterwards in this, and I wish that he would see it and support it, because this fucking made his, opened him up to a whole new range of stuff when people saw him in this film.
Yeah, no, you watch this movie and you can see that he's going to be a movie star.
That's exactly it.
I love the narration. How did you decide on the tone and the voice?
Well, that's Leo Trombetta's voice, the editor. And Leo had cut Little Children for Todd Field. And I love that voiceover in it. I love the tone of it. And the only two ideas that I had where I felt like the movie needed a real frame. And so it was to redo the opening titles and redo, as we were talking about, to have a cohesive score from the beginning to the end and the voiceover. And because I really liked it in Little Children, I said, well, Leo, let's see how it goes. I didn't want to be like telling you what you're seeing on screen, but there had been passages I had underlined that I always liked. So I gave that to Leo, and I said, just read them and trust your judgment. And maybe I took 3 or 4 out or moved one or got edited one, but it was pretty much, I liked what it did. It just kind of kept the detached third-person quality of the novel. It brought it to, and it's not like trying to be too winky. It's like, it's there, it drops out. It's kind of unexpected. Doesn't make it very heavy. It's just like another little element to it. But I want to just, again, keep a consistency.
I'm curious if you could tell us how much of the original release is in this, and how much of it's new, and what the process was of gathering these elements together and finding them 25 years later and just trying to reassemble this whole new film from the ingredients of the first one.
It was like an archaeological dig, and honestly my tenacity just to get it done was, thank God for Dan Berger at Oscilloscope, who agreed to do it. And when you're doing this, there wasn't tons of money, but I was the only person who was consistent throughout the whole thing. I had a great woman named Liz Curran who was helping. But it was you're not paying these people on a salary, right? So the original film that went out was 97 minutes. So there's the IP, the existing good quality print of that. But we took, probably 18 minutes out of that, maybe 20, that we got rid of. Scenes was like, okay, that's gone. He's painting and he's kind of misogynistic about things. That's repetitive, the whole preacher. And so we took a lot out, maybe 20 minutes. Then said what to put back in. Maybe we put in a total of 55 new minutes, right? So the aggregate was a little bit more than 35 or 30 minutes. So it went from 97 to 205, right? So it wasn't all just adding, it was getting rid of, reshaping, some cutting, some judicious cutting within scenes where it's just kind of changed the tone. The fuckathon scene, it went on longer, and Gunnar was having sex, and Sonny stopped and was looking to his friend, and you kind of felt like he needed to hear him, so he needed to now act and be the big love her. The voiceover kind of explains that and explains the backstory of Buddy in a really effective way. So Leo's great, so I was like, wow, that's really good. It's smooth, it's clean. So the process, once we had, here's the film, and originally I thought I was going to be like, since it was low budget, I thought, here's the film, all the other stuff I'm going to take from the beta cams that I had been looking at, and then all the edge code numbers and time code numbers were all underneath the letterbox. I'm like, great, I'll just get the tapes, up-res them, and can kind of in color correction take the up-res video and the film and kind of beat up the film and up-res the thing and make it look like maybe a grimy, more Kodachromy kind of thing. Well, we did the up-res test and it just looked terrible. It's like, oh, I'm fucked. I literally called Dan Berger and I was like, I'm not sure we can do this. And so Liz knew Christian over at Photochem, and we had a budget, and he goes, well, why aren't you doing it on film? Did you ever budget that? And once he did the budget for like, okay, here's the amount of new stuff, and here's what you have, it was maybe 20K more. And Dan was great, he goes, okay, we'll do it for that, because everything else was like dirt cheap and favors, and a lot of favor banks, right, for the other stuff. Thank you, Pete, thank you, Stan Kastner, the mix, everything. So, like, great. So we do that, start pulling the neg, and you start pulling the neg, and boop, boop. $140 an hour, these guys at Photochem pulling that. Great, we found 20, we found that reel, yep, because you got everything on numbers. It's all edge code numbers that the assistant editor had. And then, like, the next week, everybody goes, we only found 9 shots. I'm like, okay, the next week, we found 4 shots. I'm like, now they're not looking for, they don't know the footage, they're just looking through reels and looking at numbers. I'm like, and this $140 an hour, and finally the price tag comes in, and people asleep at the switch, and Liz wasn't full-time. I was like, what? And the oscilloscope, to their credit, were like, whoa, let's stop. And I said, let's stop, because I knew what we were missing. And I said, where's that whole scene? Where's the Sundance cut? There's no print of the Sundance cut. That scene was on there. I found an old VHS of the Sundance cut. I'm like, where is that stuff? Those are the numbers. So you go into this like dig and you're looking, and like I was like, okay, stop. So I go on Facebook and I said, I gotta find somebody who could handle film, neg and print and everything. So Joe D, stand in front of this guy, Joe D, awesome guy out in Burbank. And I walk in, he's got his Steenbecks and everything. I just go get every box of film out of Photochem, out at the lab, that Lakeshore place out in Valencia. We started looking through everything. He goes, look for lifts, look for this, look for like these different names, because not trims, because that's the shit cut off the steak. You don't want that, that's already been cut. But like, where is that scene? So it became this thing of like, put up that reel, like, oh my God, there's a work print of the fingering scene. There's a dub of a suicide scene, but it's film, so at least you have the film that you could work with. Once that's scanned, you can really do a lot. And if you notice the suicide scene, like some shots are really shitty because that was from a work print. So there was no Sundance print, because the movies are cut and the negatives cut, you make a print, but then you're going back and ripping it apart again to do the thing. So it was a real, I spent 3 weeks with him of digging, and it's like, we're missing 4 shots. And Roger, the assistant editor, and Leo did a little surgery. Literally, there's jump cuts where there's 3 like frames and there was tape splices on it, and I got a favor from my friend who I'd done a TV thing with, and it was like $10,000 worth of fixes that he did for peanuts, like, and it was just literally like piecing it together, Scotch tape here, a little film there, because we had already mixed it. We had already had the cut locked, but we had to find the stuff, and I'm like, so I knew what my bare minimum was, and if there was a scene that wasn't, like scenes that were missing, the quarry scene of them jumping, like, it was gone. There was no net, there was nothing, no print, and we finally, like, 1 reel in 1 box, like, there it was. It was like, thank fucking God. So I was just like, it was the only thing that kept me alive during COVID was doing this, because it just was like, it kept going. This was like a 15, like a definitely, like 15 months from the time He said, maybe we should do this to now.
Well, it's
Longer for my explanation of it, I'm sure.
well, it's great. I really enjoyed seeing it here on the big screen, and I really appreciate you coming out and talking with us, Mark. So thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Thank you for coming.